Good morning, Abundant Life Church. This is Pastor Chris, and today we're going to be continuing our study of Romans chapter 3, verses 1 down through 8. Now, we've been talking about these ridiculous straw man questions that Paul is bringing up, and they all boil down to this. Hey, you know what? If God's forgiveness is good, if God's forgiveness makes him look good, then why are you telling me not to sin? I'm making God look great. These are questions that someone is going to ask who's trying to make your argument look silly. So why is Paul bringing them up? Why is Paul asking them? Well, I've watched enough episodes of, Perry Mason, Law and Order, those kinds of shows, to know that a good lawyer, at least a good TV lawyer, if there's a tough question, he or she brings it up first. They don't wait for the opposition to bring it up. They bring it up so that they can handle it and they can deal with it. So was Paul just trying to head off trouble before his enemies could ask these same questions? Yeah, absolutely. Of course he was. He was diffusing their arguments. But even if we see that that's what he was doing, we still have to find out why his opponents would have a problem with grace. Why would anybody have a problem with the idea of, hey, you know what? God's going to save you. You can't save yourself, so God is going to give you the gift of salvation. And we have to consider something else. Paul's opponents, let's be honest, as silly as their arguments sound, they have a pretty good point. Is grace a free license to sin? Now, you're going to say, of course it's not. All right, and you'd be right. But the question is, how do you explain that to somebody? Look at how grace is set up. God said he would forgive our sins. Okay, great. But what's to prevent somebody then from sinning all they want, knowing that God is still going to take them, God is still going to love them, and still going to save them as long as they ask for forgiveness? Wouldn't grace lead to worse sins? And wouldn't it lead to a system where they actually have to obey, get ready for this, the law? These may all seem like ridiculous questions Paul's bringing up, but they do have a good point. How is grace not a free license to sin? You can say it's not, but again, we need to explain why it's not. So how do we close this loophole in grace? All right. These seemingly silly questions actually start to explain that loophole in grace. Remember, again, these are opponents of grace who would ask these. So let's find out why they are opposing grace. And they actually do have a fairly understandable reason. Don't forget, these are people that Paul is writing to now who had hoped to be saved by keeping the law. They had counted on the old system, and now Paul introduces grace. What they were hearing was the special place you had before is gone now. Right? Well, why would they think that? There's a lot of talk right now about student loan forgiveness. I'm going to use my two boys as an example. One of my oldest son, they each had, a number of student loans when they graduated from college. My oldest son has got them all paid off. My youngest son, he still has a little ways to go. Not a lot, but some. All right. So if they get student loan forgiveness, my younger son's going to be thrilled. But how's my older son going to feel? Wait a second. I had to pay this off, and now he gets a free ride. We can start to see why Paul was bringing these questions up, because he's anticipating a lot of the Jews having a problem with the idea that now they're supposed to rely on Jesus when they've been keeping the law. They've been going out of their way to try to behave so they could be saved. They see grace as a threatening thing to their position, and they'd like some answers. Again, they make a fairly good argument. Grace does seem to have a loophole in it, and it does not seem to be fair. Under the law, you got to behave. Under grace, you get to do as you please as long as you ask God for forgiveness. And wouldn't that make us a whole bunch of irresponsible sinners? Right? That's a big loophole. But the thing is, people who think that way have missed the point. Grace was never designed as a free license to sin. They obviously aren't looking at grace the right way. They're not looking at the reason God gave it. Okay, so how did they see it? What was their view of following God? They thought the whole point of following God was to get into heaven, and they would earn their way by keeping the law. Now, actually, let's be honest. Yeah, going to heaven is a really big part of following God, but it's not the whole thing. In fact, being saved, going to heaven, is just a means to an end. It's actually not the end in and of itself. What is the real end? What's the real objective? I bet you thought I was going to say tune in next time. No, I'll tell you. I'll tell you right now. The real objective is a relationship with God. God created man originally to have fellowship with us. Sin broke that. So God sent Jesus so that our fellowship could be restored. That's what it's all about. But sin keeps that from happening. And so grace was sent to remove that stumbling block of sin so we could have fellowship with God. And that fellowship does include heaven. This is why grace is better. We'll talk more about this next time. Till then, have a great day.